Hi, and welcome back to Just Ask the Question. I am your host, Brian Caraman. With me is, he's anonymous. No, he's Miles Taylor, formerly of the Trump administration, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Uh, Miles, welcome back, and thanks for joining us.
Brian, great to be with you. I just felt like I needed to make this feel like a deep throat sort of interview, try to make it feel like I'm in a dark parking lot. So here we are.
Yeah, I'll throw you the suitcase underneath and you just fill out the forms and bring it back to me.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah,
we're all good.
exactly.
Say, look, I wanted to bring you here to talk a little bit about what happened with Donald and, of course, the president of Poland. But more importantly, today, for the first time in a long time, we got to see the victims of Jeffrey Epstein's victims who appeared in the Capitol and said that, among other things, Donald Trump was essentially, the chief guy in Epstein's Rolodex. And of course, in the White House, Donald Trump responded by saying, "Hey, we've had. I don't want to hear this anymore. It's all a Democratic hoax. I've had enough. Isn't it really? We should move on." But the problem is, it's not a Democratic hoax, and the problem is, he promised to release the files. Now, you know the MAGA people pretty good. You think they're going to be happy with what happened today, or content? I guess is the better word.
Look, I think this remains an enormous political liability to the president because his own base, I think, is not going to be satiated by what they have seen so far. And, look, there's nothing more powerful than the victims and the families of the victims coming forward and basically saying that because the Justice Department won't do its goddamn job, that they are having to do that job. They are combing through files. They are coming up with what is effectively the client list. They are doing the work that the federal government should be doing and trying to shine a light. And look, I think if you're weighing two different audiences here, and you're weighing, do you believe the Ghislaine Maxwell, the convicted associate of a pedophile, who tries to exonerate Donald Trump and has every reason to, because she wants to get a pardon to get out of prison? Or do you believe the victims and the families of the victims? I think it's pretty evident here whose testimony weighs a lot more heavily in the mind of the public and in people's consciences. And look, I think after today, and some of those conversations are still happening. I think we're going to see a number of those families and victims on television tonight and tomorrow, talking about this, calling for a release. I think it's really ratcheting up pressure on this administration to do more than just the performative things that they've been doing by releasing files that are already in the public domain. That's pissing people off, and it's pissing people off in Trump's own movement. And I think one of the things that stands out to me, Brian, as silly as this sounds, when you've lost the podcasting bros, you're in a bad place. And there's these, a lot of these podcasting bros, they love Donald Trump, but they're pretty pissed off about the Epstein stuff. And that's really got him
Yeah.
very, very worried. And I think rightfully so.
Do you think that? Well, we both think it's not going to go away, but do you think that Donald Trump fully understands how bad it is, and do you think that it is essentially a pre? I mean, as I was told today, I'll put it this way: I was talking with a Republican who said, "Hey, look, right now we're throwing anything we can against the wall to make it stick, so we don't have to deal with it," and that Donald Trump essentially still doesn't understand how bad this can hurt him.
I think this feels like a classic death by a thousand cuts political situation. And Brian, you've witnessed and covered so many of these in your career, of politicians who just they
Yes,
think
I'm
they
old.
can weather, yeah, they think they can weather the storm, and they'll just keep holding on. And then there's one more revelation and a second revelation and a third. I mean, we're on revelation number 65 with this guy in Epstein, and every single time it does political damage to him. And I think, Trump's made his whole career, though, of turning denial into an asset. But this is one of those issues where it's just not working for him because usually when he spins that denial, he gets his core base to go along with him and to deny the facts. And this is just that one issue that, man, they had staked his return to office on the going after the deep staters and the conspiracy theory. And so this cuts to the core of what his audience thought they were getting in a second Trump term. And so, I think it's going to continue to hurt him enormously until there are some real revelations out of this administration. And I think his supporters are frustrated that they're getting more insight and new information out of the victims and the victims' families than they are out of the Trump Justice Department.
Well, but here, maybe Donald is banking on this because on the flip side, I met someone today, a Republican Party in Texas, who says it isn't guaranteed just because the districts were gerrymandered that Donald Trump is going to, the Republicans will win those gerrymandered districts. He said if you had a conservative Democrat with common sense, they might take some of these districts. But the problem is, as they see it, between a choice between the Democrats and Donald Trump, who they admit now may be trying to destroy the Constitution, they still think that Donald Trump is better than a Democrat and that there aren't any real conservative Democrats or any Democrats with common sense. Do you sense that is the case, or that Donald is banking on that?
Well, look, I mean, I have to be honest here, Brian. I think there is some truth to that, in that,
No, lie to me because I love it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Look, the Democrats are hurting right now. I just came from a conversation with someone, a group of people who are very politically savvy, and went and had dinner with a really interesting group of people, and I went around the table and I asked, who folks were inspired by at the moment in the Democratic Party and who was really standing up to this president and the MAGA movement right now. And while the people I was with were excited to see what Gavin Newsom was doing, I think there was a general sense that there really isn't a lot of gumption right now in the Democratic Party. And there's no one throwing it back at Donald Trump the way he's throwing it out there. And yeah, Gavin Newsom's starting to do that. But I think the comment at the dinner was, this is 10 years too late. We needed someone a decade ago in that party standing up. And so at the moment, I still really don't see the pushback that there needs to be from the Democratic Party. However, I'll add a giant asterisk is I think of all things, it really has been Gavin Newsom's hilarious social media satire that's gotten the Democrats to think about upping their game. You're seeing, Pritzker in Illinois and Wes Moore and all of these other folks start to mount a little bit more of an aggressive posture and, dare I say, gain a little bit of swagger because they're realizing that they have to do that right now. They need to, and that they're up against something that people can't just treat using the normal go-to mechanisms of politics and the talking points. So, I gotta agree with the MAGA movement right now that I think the Dems are weak, and I think that they're not really built for this moment. But I see the tide starting to turn a little bit.
Yeah, obviously they're weak. I mean, as one person put it, think of how bad Donald Trump is, and consider the fact that the Democrats can't mount someone to defeat him, as bad as he is. And that it's not that Donald Trump is great; it's that the Democrats are that bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and I do have to foot stomp. I think you and I talked a little bit about this before when we talked about South Park, but I have to say again that if there's one message that I have for Democrats who are trying to figure out how to message this moment, is it needs to be satire. Use satire. Look at what South Park did. And I say that because satire is the thing that, like, completely freezes their programming. Remember when you used to have a Microsoft computer and you would get the blue screen of death? Is your computer basically threw up its hands and said, I don't know what the fuck to do. I'm dead. I can't do anything. This is what happens to the GOP when you use satire. When you make fun of them, they don't know how to respond. And Donald Trump, even though people for years said, well, how do you do satire about this guy? He's so over the top. But that's the whole point. And that's why Newsom's been able to channel it, is highlighting how absurd uh, everything that we're living through is the most effective way, not just to break through and mock these guys, but to get independents off the couch saying, yeah, you know what? I am sick of all of this craziness. This is crazy. I mean, Brian, I know you felt it when you were covering the White House. I felt it when I was in the first Trump administration. It's like that scene. Is it in Zoolander when Will Ferrell says, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills? Like, we have all been living in and witnessing this tragicomedy that is the United States under Donald Trump. And I'll tell you, even the most diehard MAGA Republicans in Washington, they go out for drinks at the DC bars afterwards and they say to each other, man, the president really is crazy as a fucking fox, isn't he? I mean, they're all kind of amazed that this is happening. Well, yes, the emperor has no clothes. We know it. Let's point at him and laugh as he goes down the street. Come on, people. It's like I want to grab America by the lapels and shake them and be like, everyone knows what we're going through is messed up. Let's start calling it out. And the ones who've started to use satire, I think, are finally doing it effectively.
Yeah, I agree with that. There was, that was the old John Lennon saying is, what they if you get violent, they can plan for that, but when you laugh at them, they can't. And
That's
that
right.
was kind of Groucho Marx's theory as well. I mean, Duck Soup in 1937 was making fun of Hitler and the world, but did it with supreme satire. So yeah, I'm all for the humor of it, and especially because I know Donald doesn't get that. It doesn't
Yeah.
compute in his head.
And he's really bad
So
at doing
the other question,
actual humor because he's terrible at
oh
self-deprecation, and he could deflect it all if he was
yes,
good at self-deprecation. Like, think about George W. Bush. Love or hate George W. Bush, he was fantastic at being self-deprecating. He loved it. He loved to go do satire that poked fun at his intelligence, and he spoke at the White House Correspondents' dinners, and he liked to poke fun at himself, and that was disarming. And so all the criticisms Bush would get, dang, it really frustrated his critics because he could be self deprecating. Donald Trump can't do that. He doesn't like to make fun of himself. In fact, it's the thing that he's scaredest of because he worries it makes him look like a loser. And so he really starts to fall apart when he's made fun of. It's a very effective way at going after the guy and going after his lieutenant.
yeah, I do remember the time in the White House where he was making fun of Steve Mnuchin, and he could make fun of Mnuchin, but he couldn't and wouldn't turn it on himself. And what was funny was even the Secret Service guys in the back standing next to me were going, "This guy's horrible. He's like a failed stand-up comic," and I think that's Donald Trump is absolutely a failed stand-up comic. He wants to be funny, but he just can't do it.
That's I like it when you do your Reagan. I think you should do, Brian, an entire episode as your Ronald Reagan.
Don't get me started. That we'll be here all night doing that. The other one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about was he's gutting the Civil Service Act. Now that's the Pendleton Act that was brought about in 1883. Chester Arthur A. Arthur signed it into law. It came on the heels of James A. Garfield being shot, and it was put together so that we would have not patronage jobs, but actual civil service jobs that are not beholden to the person in power. Donald Trump is tearing that apart, and I
Yep.
find it to be extremely dangerous for the country. And I know you have expressed an opinion on that as well, and I'd love to plumb the depths of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think all joking aside, we're witnessing a completely unprecedented gutting of the government. But it's not just a gutting of the government. That's one thing. It's a gutting of the government, and it's a an intentional flooding of the government with loyalists who will execute the law in the president's favor instead of the favor of the American people. Both of those things, I think, are egregious and history making developments. Even if all Donald Trump was doing was just trying to hollow out the government to save money, it would be huge. And an extraordinary news story in its own right, because the American people would lose services from the National Weather Service to healthcare at CDC to protection of nuclear weapons, you name it. That gutting of the civil service is having enormous destructive impact. And yet, that's not all they're doing, because the intent is to clear out those jobs so that they can fill those jobs with people who will go execute the law the way the president wants to. And let me tell you, from having worked for Donald Trump, how he wants to use the law. He wants to execute the laws to create leverage. In almost every decision I ever saw him make, and most of them were on Homeland Security issues, he didn't make the decision in the best interest of the country or the American people. He made decisions to get leverage over other people. So if there were wildfires in California and he had the opportunity to disperse aid to people whose houses burned down, well, he wanted to wait to disperse that aid until he could get on the phone with the Democratic governor and say, basically, what do I get for it? If you want people to actually get money to rebuild their homes, we've got to make some kind of trade. That's how Donald Trump views government. And he wants to use your government and your taxpayer dollars to get leverage over you and your mayors and your governors. That's what he wants to do. And he can't do it all by himself. I mean, that was one of the big takeaways from the first term, is he hated that there were people like me who are conservatives who went into the Trump administration and didn't want to break the law, right? I'll swat down the misconception that Miles Taylor and the deep state were saying no to Donald Trump's lawful orders. Oh, if the president could do something lawfully, it wasn't my damn job to tell him, well, Mr. President, I don't like it that you want to do that, so we're not going to do that. No, I didn't do that shit. But if the president wanted to do something illegal or unconstitutional, you bet your ass I wasn't going to go execute that, and certainly not going to do it for a man like that. And those are the type of people you want in government. Donald Trump did not want those people in government because he wanted to do things that were illegal and unconstitutional all the time. And you know what's amazing about this to me, Brian, is I spent years talking about that. And of course, getting blasted by the MAGA right. This is BS. What Miles Taylor is saying is preposterous. Donald Trump doesn't want to do illegal and unconstitutional things. Just look at the first 7 months of this administration. He has had dozens of court rulings come out against him, showing that the things he wants to do are illegal and unconstitutional. I wasn't lying, folks. Whether you liked the access of adults or not, those people were stopping Donald Trump from doing things that broke the law and violated the Constitution. And now he has the team he wants, but he's not satisfied with just the cabinet secretaries and their lieutenants being the people who will go break the law for him. He wants your whole federal government to be stocked with those loyalists. And that, to me, is the biggest story of corruption in all the history of America. I don't mean since Watergate. I don't
Yes.
mean since the early 20th century. I mean in the entire 249 years of this country, the biggest story of corruption is Donald Trump trying to replace the federal government with people who will serve him.
So that brings me to the question. He has been repulsed by federal court system all the way up to the appeals court, federal appeals court. Do you think the Supreme Court will bail him out, or do you think John Roberts will grow a spine? I mean, it's
I
going to
think
boil
I
down
think
to. I mean,
largely
there are some of these
this
cases.
yeah. I mean I think
Go ahead.
largely the Roberts court is going to bail him out, unfortunately, in a lot of cases. And here's why: is at the end of the day, John Roberts, who I will say personally is the type of look, he's a judicial conservative in the way that I would imagine in any other time period I would want to see a judicial conservative, except he is an institutionalist to a fault. And here's what I mean by that: is if you go back and you look at John Roberts' decision in the ACA, Obamacare, and I think it was 2011 when they ruled in that case, or maybe it was 2012. that is one of the most instructive decisions about who John Roberts is a lot of conservatives like me expected him to strike down Obamacare, and he didn't. And his primary reason for doing so, he kind of tied himself in pretzel knots to reach this decision, was basically that he didn't want the Supreme Court weighing in on such a contentious issue. And so he basically punted it back to the Congress and said, I'm not going to make it the court's job to strike this down. Let the American people's representatives change it if they want to. Now, a lot of liberals like that, but those same liberals are now, and they should be, concerned that the same John Roberts doesn't want to weigh in on big fights with Donald Trump in a way that, in his view, compromises the Supreme Court's effort to be above the fray. And this is concerning to me for a couple of reasons. But the biggest reason is because the judiciary is a co-equal fucking branch of government. And it's not John Roberts' job to be
Supposedly.
above the fray and avoid politics. He's in politics. He's in the American political system, and he must defend his branch's prerogatives. And right now, we're witnessing the biggest assault on the rule of law in modern American history. And we are counting on the judiciary to stand up for itself. And so, if Robert's goal is to preserve his legacy as not getting the Supreme Court to weigh in a way that contradicts the executive, in a way that's controversial, then he may succeed in preserving his legacy. But what he won't do is succeed in preserving the judiciary and that co-equal branch of government. And they're going to be put to the test because I know Stephen Miller, and Stephen Miller had said to me during the first Trump administration that in the second term, their plan would be to run as many decisions as humanly possible, as fast as possible, up to the Supreme Court. That was their plan. I'm telling you right now, America, they said their plan was get sued on as many things as possible and as quickly as possible run it up to the court. And I sat, Stephen Miller had an office on the second floor of the West Wing. Brian, you've been there, you've seen it. I sat in that office as Stephen talked about, here's how it will play out. We'll do all of these things, we'll get sued on all of them, and by the time we get to the second Supreme Court term, so that's next June, we will have gotten answers on a lot of the things that we want. And that is their goal, because that's when the court's next term will end, is next June. A lot of those decisions will come down on the most controversial issues of this Trump administration. And they are banking on a Roberts court either siding with them or figuring out a way to not get punched and to stay out of the debate. And that's bad for the American people because we need a judiciary that stands up for itself. And I'm concerned that John Roberts in court won't.
Well, you mentioned that. I talked to someone today who said they wouldn't be surprised if they simply, to your point about him trying to stay above the fray, not take up the cases, because then they wouldn't become involved, and the
Yeah.
federal appeals court would. And so I recognize that as a viable alternative, but wonder if the fear of not being involved in it somehow would drive them to to take up the cases, as Stephen Miller said. So I'm stuck. I don't know whether I believe they'll turn down some of these cases or they'll take them and side with Trump in order to preserve what they. But the problem with that is the fallacy I find with that, and believe me, I've heard the same things that you have. But the fallacy with that is, I tell them, is that you're not preserving the judiciary. You're not preserving anything. You are, in fact, destroying it by refusing to rule against the autocrat. But I think it's going to be interesting to see whether he stands up for the judiciary, whether they decide not to hear some of these cases and only take the ones that they think they really should take.
Well, and I think
I
some of these
don't know.
people, Brian, I think some of these justices are in total denial. I mean, look, these are flesh and blood human beings who put their pant legs on one leg at a time, like the rest of us. And I think, like other people you and I know
Supposedly.
in politics, yeah, like other people you and I know in politics, they're in a little bit of denial about this moment that we are in. I mean, we know very senior members of Congress on both sides of the aisle who don't fully grasp the seriousness of the moment. And I think some of the justices are very much in that place. These aren't gods, they're not angels, they're not super deities. They're human beings that sit in their chambers, they watch the news like the rest of us, and I think some of them are in denial about Donald Trump's autocratic impulses, and they're looking at TV like the rest of folks and saying, well, like, yeah, he's brash. Yeah, some of this stuff sounds crazy, but he's not really at war with the judiciary. Wake up, justices. He is. He doesn't believe in your power. And you can
Yeah.
rule against him. And trust me, if it's on an issue he cares about, he is willing to defy you. And I don't say that out of speculation. I say that from having sat in the Oval Office and heard Donald Trump say, let's ignore the judges. Let's get rid of the judges. He doesn't care. Rule of law does not matter to him. And the judiciary needs to understand that the entire branch itself is under assault. It doesn't matter that Trump's a Republican. It wouldn't matter if it was a Democrat. We have someone who doesn't want to abide by the rule of law. And if that guardrail goes, the whole thing's gone, man. The project's over, right? We are not going to be able to recover from simply ignoring a president ignoring judicial decisions and thumbing his nose at the judiciary. That's it, man. The project's toast. So like we need courts that are willing to draw a line in the sand to scare the president from not crossing it.
You've actually heard him say, let's ignore the judges.
No, I've heard him say, let's get rid of the judges. How crazy is that, Brian? There
Yeah.
was a conversation we had in the Oval Office. Stephen Miller was there, the president was there, a couple of other cabinet members, and I'm pretty sure it was the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals that had just ruled against Donald Trump. And he was so frustrated. He was apoplectic. And he basically was just spouting off in the Oval and asking if we could get rid of the judges. Now, I'm hoping what Donald Trump meant at the
Jesus.
time was not like, go throw them in an unmarked van, but it was clear what he was saying is like, is there some mechanism for us to just turn off these appeals courts and get rid of them? And that led to a subsequent conversation in the first Trump administration about what's called judicial gerrymandering. Is after Donald Trump's blow up in the Oval Office that week, there was an effort to get Republican members of Congress to start gerrymandering some of these appellate courts in Trump's favor. Now, that failed. There were not enough Republican senators and congressmen interested in doing that. But that's something that's come up again right now. And I have a strong suspicion that before the midterms next year, that there will be a last ditch push in the House and the Senate to try to take steps that you would characterize as judicial gerrymandering to try to remove some of these courts. There's been conversation about impeaching some of those judges that rule against the Trump administration. They want a full court press. They don't just want to thumb their nose at judicial decisions. They want to change who's sitting in those seats, and they want to restack the courts. And look, I think that that could go a lot of really weird places before we even get to the midterm elections.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it will certainly be interesting after the midterm elections when the lawsuits come in as to
That's right.
how they're adjudicated if you've actually picked your judges. Jesus, Mary
Yep.
and Joseph. All right. So let me end this with and here's an issue you and I could discuss for hours. The press, the the resulting end of the free press. I have been
Yep.
saying for a while. I think it's toast. I can't get into a briefing. I have a hard pass. There's no hard questions asked of him anymore. He limits himself. And then, of course, this week there was the speculation in the press that he was going to resign or that he was dead, and all of that was just BS. And it was, I mean, anybody who thinks that Donald Trump is going to resign is has no facts and no common sense because he's a soul sucker. I mean, he sucks power. He lives on it. He's not getting rid of it. So hearing that in the press dis, disheartened me. But those who are actually speculating that he was dead also disheartened me because we don't usually. It's not the press's job. We have a press pool for a reason. We see the president. We say we see the president. Here he is. That is a death watch. I mean, that's what the pool was set up to be. And even as we're trying to attempt to do their job, I have friends of mine in the pool going, they fell asleep in the pool. They didn't see the president. We're not doing our basic job. So I have said that I believe that the free press is a thing of the past. That's in the rearview mirror. and I'd love to hear what you think of it.
Stark stuff, Brian. I will say, I think the First Amendment is on fire. I mean, really, the First Amendment is on fire in every way, shape, and form. The parts of the amendment that grant you and me and everyone else the right to free speech are on fire because the president is trying to engage in censorship through intimidation, using all elements of national power to intimidate the opposition, all the way to the provisions of the First Amendment ensuring a free press. He has hijacked the institutions of the free press that are funded by the United States government to either turn their coverage in his favor, and if not, to get rid of them altogether. He has threatened news media organizations with the revocation of their FCC licenses, like ABC and NBC, so they can literally no longer broadcast if they don't change their coverage more favorably. He has sued those organizations in court. He's individually attacked specific journalists he doesn't like, resulting in threats to some of those people's lives.
Hello.
And in some cases, like with CBS News, he's installed a monitor who reports directly to the president, who monitors bias at CBS News. If you don't think the First Amendment's on fire in this country, you're out of your fucking mind and you don't deserve to be an American. This is happening. This is real. You can't be in denial about it like John Roberts is clearly in denial. You have to wake up and accept it. Because
Yes.
once you accept it, then you can start thinking about what the real solutions are, which is okay, if those institutions, if those legacy institutions are being targeted by the President of the United States, and if some of them aren't living up to their jobs, well, then we got to go fill the gap somewhere else. And that's where, I don't want to pat ourselves on the back, those of us that are in the realm of new media. I'm not saying Substack is the answer to all of our woes about a First Amendment that's on fire. But if we're going to push back against this, we need a new crop of people and new platforms emerging that are impossible for them to shut down. Like water through rocks, we've got to make it impossible for them to censor truth in this country. And I think the rapid proliferation of new media platforms has made it harder and harder for a would-be authoritarian to figure out how to shut it down. I mean, hell, look at the Chinese. They spent decades trying to figure out how their Great Wall of censorship could prevent criticism online. And even then, they're worried about this age that we're going into. We can't let something like that happen in the United States. Believe me, Donald Trump wants it. He wants to impose that level of censorship. And we've got to flock to these new platforms to make sure it doesn't happen.
Well, you and I will talk further about that because there's some interesting movements being made in the business, and we'll talk offline about that. But
Let's talk offline. Also,
I want to
hilarious
thank
thing
you
I should
for.
have just showed you, Brian. A stray cat just jumped on the hood of my car, climbed up the windshield, and then ran off the back. I've never had anything like that happen in Washington, D.C. before. The cats are running the
Are you
town.
sure?
Why is the National Guard not stopping the stray cats?
It was an ICE agent. Come on. That's
Dear
Well, anyway,
God.
Miles, I want to thank you for joining me again. It's always a pleasure. I'd love to have you back, and we will talk offline. There's a lot going on. So I want to thank you for joining us. This is Just Ask the Question. I'm your host, Brian Karam. Join us again next time. Yay.